what they really want to hear about. They don't want to have champagne, they don't want to catch up with their mates, they really want to hear about genetics. But, you know. Okay, I'll get going anyway. My name is Lisa Eckstein. I'm a lecturer here in the law faculty. I'm a lecturer in law and medicine. Most of my research is somewhere at the interface of genetics and law, which is what I'm going to chat with you about today. And so what I'm going to talk about is this idea of genetic sequence, about things we find when we do genetic sequencing and what we do with that information. And this is one of the real cutting-edge issues going on at the moment in genetics research and really occupying a lot of people's time. So let's kick off. Some important background when we talk about genetic research is just how much bigger and cheaper it is getting. Who here remembers when the first human genome was published? It's in 2003, although there was a big announcement in 2000. Yeah? It took about 10 years, billions of dollars, huge manpower effort. It was a massive accomplishment. We're now at a stage where it's getting in the realm of $1,000 to sequence a complete human genome. The technology we have, the capacity we have to generate massive amounts of genetic information is becoming infinitely greater. And so what's happening is we're reaching a tipping point where it is actually now getting easier and cheaper just to sequence an entire genome rather than sequencing the small particular parts of the genome we might be particularly interested in. So it used to be that what would happen is, let's say someone had a family history of breast cancer. They might go to a clinical geneticist or they might enroll in a genetic research study and say, look, I'm worried about breast cancer, and the clinical geneticist or the genetic researcher would sequence those parts of the genome that are known to be implicated in breast cancer. So everyone was pretty well on the same page about the kinds of information that was going to be generated. It was going to be information about breast cancer, and generally speaking, the geneticist or the genetic researcher knew the person wanted to know the information because that's why they came to them. The person wanted to know the information because that's why they came to them. They'd been to a genetic counsellor, so everyone was on the same page. That is no longer the main way things are done, or becoming to be no longer the main way things are done. Now, often what is happening, not always, but increasingly commonly, we are having a whole genome sequenced. And so what happens is we get huge amounts of information that have almost nothing to do with the original question, that raise a lot of issues about what should be disclosed and to whom. And there's almost no way of predicting in advance the kind of information that researchers and clinical geneticists are going to stumble across. So, I want to take you through some hypotheticals to illustrate the kinds of ethical and legal complexities that this raises. I'm going to start you off with the sort of easy one. About as easy as these things come. So, you can see up on the slides in front of you, we have an 18-year-old Ethan who's enrolled in a research study. And the aim of this research study is to sequence the full genomes of 1,000 people. There's a few of these research studies going on in the UK and the US. So the researchers who do this study find out that Ethan has a particular genetic variant that predisposes him to bowel cancer, and it's generally recommended that people with this genetic variant get routine colonoscopies every year from puberty onwards to make sure that no cancer is developing. Okay. Should the researchers tell Ethan that he has this particular genetic variant?
Lisa, when you create a research study, you'll have a couple of documents that you first sign.
Excellent.
And
good point.
This should be dealt with there.
Great. We can look at the informed consent document. We can say, well, what does he want to know? Okay? And most people use that as a starting point. So often someone will say, do you want to know information in a study like this? Normally the whole reason they're enrolling in the study is to find out information about themselves. So they'll have signed a box somewhere saying, yes, I want to know genetic information. So assume you tick the box saying yes.
Well, you tell him.
You tell him. Yeah. People agree that sounds like a good idea to tell him?
Well, I think it's human being, you want to tell him.
As a human being, what do you mean as a human being you want to tell him?
As opposed to research.
There's nothing to do with genetic research, but he doesn't know what their ethical and professional obligations are. Of course, I'd say, I tell him. Then you come to the next one. Do we have to? And I don't know.
Okay, so a few nods for the yeah, we should probably tell him. We have, he's probably consented to it, something about human dignity, that it seems like a good idea he should know. Then we get to the next one, do we have to tell him? Do we? Ben's nodding, he's like,
You mean from a legal point of view or an ethical point of view?
Either, whichever you prefer. There's almost no law suggesting that someone can be liable in negligence for not telling someone of genetic risk. It's an open question that hasn't been tested in the courts. Most legal analyses have suggested it's a low likelihood that a court would find negligence for not telling. Possible?
If it's an ethical question, the have to, you could say, is just another way of
moral
expressing
obligation?
the should, but then it's
no,
moral.
There's differences because should he be told, you're saying, well, the researcher can make a decision. Does he have to be told, is there a moral obligation? Is there an ethical obligation on the researcher to tell him?
We may actually need a little bit more information because
Jan's
it's hard to believe that the research study only aims to sequence. There has to be a reason for aiming to sequence.
No, multiple of these research studies are just aiming to do lots and lots of sequences to generate a database of human genetic variation.
But the database would then be intended for some further purpose.
Yes-ish. Anyway, you're all way too much like lawyers, quibbling with details. Generally, most people in the field would say, yeah, we should tell him. We might not have to tell him if it's going to use up too much research money, because the goal of research is to do research, so if it's going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars to tell all these people, then maybe we don't have to tell him.
Does it depend on the sort of risk that he's exposed to?
Good question. Let's move on. How about this one? Nice segue. Thank you. We now have our 52-year-old woman, Mary, who is enrolled in a research study to find out about her family history of breast cancer. The researchers do a whole genome sequence because it's easier than just doing a targeted search for the breast cancer genes, and stumble. They're not really looking at the Alzheimer's genes, but they just happen to stumble across the fact that, oh, she has a predisposition for Alzheimer's disease. We can't do anything about this at the moment. There's no drug that she can take that is going to forestall the progression of Alzheimer's, but she may be able to do other things. She may be able to, for example, take a lot of holidays now with her grandchildren. She might be able to lobby for additional money to be spent on Alzheimer's disease funding. Let's assume that there is nothing in the consent form that indicates whether or not she would want to find out information about Alzheimer's disease. And that's pretty realistic. Most of these consent forms either say nothing at all or have such vague sentences that you can't really gain a true picture of what consent might or might not have been given. What do? Do we tell her? No. Why not?
Because it's predisposed rather than being something a lot more.
All genetic information predisposes, none of it. Let's say there's a 70% chance she's going to get Alzheimer's disease.
I think if everybody who lives long enough will get Alzheimer's disease.
Okay, but she might be getting Alzheimer's disease in 7 years.
I'm also thinking, Lacey, you'd want to weigh up, principles like beneficence versus harms. And obviously, as a researcher, one of your primary obligations is to try and do no harm.
Okay.
So that would be a concern for me to what extent you're causing emotional distress, discomfort.
We have this thing called the right not to know. This idea that sometimes people don't want to know information like this because it might harm them. They might come back and say, I wish you had never told me that. I wish I didn't know that because now every time I misplace my car keys, I'm going to think that this is the beginning of the end. So Carolyn, you're leaning on the let's just let that slide. Let's pretend we never saw that.
Unless I thought there was more she could do.
Okay, so the key thing here seems to be, unless there's something she can do about it, let's just push it to one side.
Lisa, in practice, do consent forms for that kind of study have a kind of an opt-in or an opt-out clause in there. If we happen to find additional information, do you want to know?
Some do. It's very difficult. Some have a sentence like that. There is a lot of argument about whether a sentence like that means anything, because unless you have about a day's worth of genetic counselling explaining the kinds of information that might be found and the ramifications of that information, it is hard to accept that as a true consent and a true indication of what someone would want to know.
But if it was a clear no, you could certainly take that as a lack of consent.
Yeah. So we could say, let's say there's a clear no, we can assume she doesn't want to know anything. Very, very rare to have that clear no. Most people veer on the side of, tell me, really want to know. But yes, if there was a no, we could take that as a no. If there's a yes,
why don't you ask?
Great. A lot of people say this. Let's ask the person, do you want to know? We have found that you have a risk of a condition. Do you want to know more? Hands up if you would say yes. Hands up if you would say no. Okay, interesting. Most people, if asked, if told, we have information about you, do you want to know what we know about you? Most people will say yes. Because it's very difficult for someone to be like, hey, you know stuff about me, and by the time you know that someone knows something about you, you know there's something bad going on. You know there's something wrong. They're not going to tell you that unless there is something they think that you need to hear. And so then the curiosity builds. So you change the information environment just by asking someone, do you want to know?
Even consent aside, wouldn't you be asking yourself questions in those circumstances about, if I don't tell this person, or I do tell this person, how does that affect their choices?
Absolutely. And a lot of researchers get really worried about this. A lot of researchers say, how am I meant to sleep at night if I don't tell them? How does it impact on me as a moral human being if I haven't told these people this secret I know about them? Now, this is a fun one.
Please, can I ask one more?
Yeah, of
course. There's no treatment, but say, what's her name?
Mary, I think. Must be Alzheimer's disease.
Could access a progressive form of euthanasia now that she couldn't access when she had Alzheimer's. Would you tell her?
It would certainly change the equation. I don't know how much. Generally, the concept we're talking about there is generally in the literature called actionability, and there's a lot of variation in what people think it means for information to be actionable. Normally what we're talking about is some kind of therapy. That would probably fall within more of a life planning type situation, which so far hasn't normally been included, at least in researchers' definitions of actionability, but often is included in what members of the public think actionability means. So, final one. I'm getting looks from Jan of wrapping up. So, there are estimates that somewhere in the realm of 1 in 10 people who get complete genetic sequencing from them and their parents, about 1 in 10 of those, it's found that the father may not be the biological father. Pretty common. Here we have a poor soul Jack who has a progressive genetic condition. He's told he has a chance of finding out what's wrong with him if he enrolls in this research study. He needs his parents to enrol as well, otherwise it's very hard to find out any information because they need to triangulate it. They start triangulating it and find out, ooh, can't really do this, the father's not father. So now we're in a sticky position.
Why would you assume parents don't know that?
Who said we're assuming that?
Yeah, but why would you then make the deal to...
You can't do the genetic research. To do this kind of genetic research, you need to find out what is different about Jack that isn't different in either of his parents. And because of the amount of variability in human genomes generally, the only way you can get that information is to have 2 complete reference genomes from the parents to cross-reference with Jack's.
So the parents have both consented.
Parents have both consented. You can have questions in your mind about whether the mother consented in the knowledge that, oh, perhaps this is a problem, but both parents have consented. We now have to tell Jack, sorry, you can't be in this study anymore. Do we tell him the reason?
No, got nothing to do with why he engaged in the study in the first place.
So what do we tell him?
We just say due to circumstances beyond that.
Ask your mother, circumstances beyond your control.
Go and ask your father.
You're actually pretty spot on with what the literature says to do. The literature basically says, don't tell, fudge some sort of reason why he can't be in the study, we have operational reasons why this isn't going to work, and then handball it off. A few people say we should tell because there's an obligation in ethics of truth-telling, and so it's considered morally objectionable to deliberately obfuscate or even worse, lie about the reason he can't be in the study anymore. But generally speaking, researchers have not shared this information. So, I'll wrap up, but basically what I wanted to get across, this is an area of research where there's a lot going on, an area I write about, an area Margaret Lasky, the Dean, writes about. There's a lot of movement happening, trying to set in place ethical, legal and policy frameworks to sort out who should be told what. Researchers are finding it very difficult to access the kind of support they need to make these decisions. They're difficult decisions that require a lot of technical expertise, as well as raising a lot of legal and ethical and policy issues. The kinds of factors people tend to think are important are a lot of the things you raised. Actionability, what can be done with the information. Clinical utility, how significant is the illness? Does it make a difference if it's something like Parkinson's disease versus something like gout? Information that might be relevant for reproductive decision making again. Do we tell people if there's nothing that will affect they themselves, but it might have implications for the way they choose to have a family? These are the kinds of questions people are grappling with. It is an emerging field. There are still no settled answers, but it is a really interesting area that a few of us at the law school are engaged in trying to help find Australian solutions for. Thank you.